In today's video, we journey back in time to uncover the secrets of the past. Welcome to a story written in the sands of history. 1. Origins and Early Life, 1537 to 1561. Toyotomi Hideyoshi was born in 1537 in the Owari Province, modern-day Aichi Prefecture, into a low-ranking samurai or possibly even peasant family. Sources vary on the precise status of his birth, but his early life was marked by poverty and obscurity. His childhood name was Hiyoshi-maru, later known as Kinoshita Tokichiro. He was the son of a sandal maker, or in some accounts, an ashigaru foot soldier, which made his later ascent all the more extraordinary in a society deeply stratified by birth. As a young man, Hideyoshi served as a servant and then a low-level retainer under the powerful daimyo Oda Nobunaga, entering Nobunaga's service around the mid-1550s. He distinguished himself by his intelligence, energy, and talent for both administration and diplomacy. One of the early anecdotes illustrating his resourcefulness involved his role in persuading a rival or mediating disputes, showcasing an adeptness not only in military matters but in political maneuvering. He changed his family name to Kinoshita, meaning under the tree, a name he later abandoned for Toyotomi. 2. Rise under Oda Nobunaga, 1561 to 1582. Hideyoshi's career accelerated under Nobunaga. He participated in key campaigns, including the famous campaign against the Imagawa and in the gradual collapse of rival regional powers. A turning point was his involvement in the capture of Inabayama Castle in 1567, after which Nobunaga renamed the province and its castle to Gifu, marking a strategic consolidation in central Japan. Hideyoshi was entrusted with greater responsibilities, administrative, logistical, and military. He was particularly noted for his talent in siege warfare. The 1570s and 1580s saw him leading successful sieges, most notably the prolonged and complex operations at the castles of Miki and Takamatsu, where he demonstrated not just brute force but strategic ingenuity, such as flooding techniques and psychological pressure. His reputation grew not just as a capable commander but as a practical problem solver. Hideyoshi's political acumen also shone. He built alliances through marriages and managed Nobunaga's campaign's rear logistics. He gained Nobunaga's trust substantially enough to be given critical assignments, and he slowly began cultivating a power base of his own. Crucially, after the death of Nobunaga's second son, and as Nobunaga's own power expanded and made enemies, Hideyoshi was positioned as one of the closest and most capable lieutenants. In 1582, the turning point came. Oda Nobunaga was betrayed and forced to commit seppuku at Honnoji by Akechi Mitsuhide. At that point, Hideyoshi was campaigning elsewhere. He rapidly negotiated a truce with opposing forces, then marched his troops with incredible speed in what came to be called the Chugoku Ogeshi, the sudden return from the Chugoku region, defeating Akechi Mitsuhide at the Battle of Yamazaki within days. This swift response placed Hideyoshi as the primary successor in the power vacuum and started the struggle among Nobunaga's former retainers. 3. Consolidation and the Path to Supremacy, 1582 to 1585. The period immediately following Nobunaga's death was a chaotic scramble. The most significant rival was Shibata Katsui, who held considerable territory and influence. The two clashed at the Battle of Shizugatake in 1583, where Hideyoshi prevailed decisively. This victory was pivotal. It not only eliminated a major rival but also allowed Hideyoshi to claim that he was Nobunaga's legitimate successor in the project of unifying Japan. He also used symbolic gestures, such as constructing grand castles and soliciting confirmation from influential shrines, to legitimize his authority. Hideyoshi then turned against the remnants of Oda power that were not under his direct control and neutralized or absorbed other regional warlords. He engineered the defeat of Shibata's allies and also orchestrated the death or submission of other competing daimyo through a mix of force, diplomacy, and carefully calibrated reward and punishment. In 1585, Hideyoshi achieved a significant formal recognition. He was granted the title of Kampuku, regent, by the imperial court in Kyoto, a post that had traditionally been held by high aristocrats, not former commoners. This was a major breakthrough in courtly legitimacy. He also adopted the prestigious family name, Toyotomi, a deliberate elevation, and the name change signaled a new dynasty. He was no longer merely a general or minister, he was positioning himself as the central pivot of the Japanese polity. That same year, he received the appointment of Daijōdaijin, chancellor, in all but name, further consolidating power over the court and military elites. 4. Unification of Japan, 1585 to 1590. With the central government and court under his control, Hideyoshi's project became the complete political unification of Japan, a goal that had eluded predecessors. He implemented a multi-pronged strategy: military subjugation where necessary, strategic marriages, and administrative reforms to stabilize conquered regions and extract resources. Key military campaigns included the suppression of resistant daimyo in western Japan, notably the Shimazu clan in Kyushu. The Shimazu, powerful in the south, were finally subdued in the Kyushu campaign of 1586 to 1587 through a combination of overwhelming force and offers of clemency to those who submitted. Another major target was the Hojo clan, which controlled the Kanto region, around modern Tokyo, and was the last significant autonomous power that resisted centralization. The siege and dismantling of Odawara Castle in 1590 during the Odawara campaign marked the final military conquest necessary for nationwide unification. The Hojo capitulated, and their lands were absorbed. In an important move, Hideyoshi relocated the powerful but potentially restive Tokugawa Ieyasu from his home territory in the Tokai region to the Kanto region, a strategic move that increased Ieyasu's territory while placing him under implicit oversight, balancing power by dispersing potential threats. To cement unification, Hideyoshi enacted several systemic reforms. Land surveys. Taiko Kenshi. He ordered nationwide cadastral surveys to calculate agricultural yields accurately and thus determine taxable wealth. These surveys standardized land assessments, increased central revenue, and allowed for a clearer understanding of the domainal economy. Sword hunt, Katanagari, 1588 officially called the sword hunt. This policy disarmed the peasantry by confiscating weapons from non-samurai. Ostensibly to prevent uprisings, it also drew a firm line between warrior and non-warrior classes, consolidating the social order and minimizing the risk of local rebellions. Separation of classes. He formalized social stratification, distinguishing warriors, samurai, from peasants, artisans, and merchants, making social mobility more rigid to ensure stability and prevent armed uprisings by commoners. Control of daimyo. Hideyoshi regulated the daimyo through mandates about residence in their domains versus presence at court, precursors to the later Sankin-Kotai system, marriage alliances, and the obligation to contribute troops or resources to the central authority. He also judiciously redistributed lands to ensure no one lord became unmanageably powerful. These policies knit together the diverse regional powers into a centralized framework with Hideyoshi at its apex. By 1590, essentially all of Japan was under his direct or indirect control, achieving what no one had before, a single regime asserting dominance across the archipelago. 5. Domestic administration and cultural patronage. Beyond military unification, Hideyoshi transformed the cultural and administrative landscape of Japan. He built grand castles as both military centers and symbols of centralized power, most famously Osaka Castle, begun in 1583. Osaka became a hub of commerce, administration, and culture, effectively a capital of his regime even while Kyoto retained its symbolic imperial significance. He patronized the arts, tea culture, and architecture, drawing on both the refined court traditions and the energetic tastes of the new warrior elite. The tea masterson no Rikyu became a close advisor and shaped the aesthetic, the wabi-sabi ethos, that Hideyoshi favored, though their relationship later soured, culminating in Rikyu's forced suicide in 1591, an episode still debated by historians as to whether it was political, personal, or aesthetic. Hideyoshi also engaged in elaborate courtly rituals to elevate his status, melding warrior authority with imperial-style legitimacy. He commissioned ceremonies, built shrines and temples, and made use of imperial titles and seals. His governance style combined practical bureaucracy with theatrical displays of power. He codified procedures for succession, adopted sons, and familial ties to secure the continuity of his regime. Though his own bloodline was fragile, his only son, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, was born relatively late. He arranged politically advantageous marriages among his retainers and allied families to weave a network of dependencies and loyalties. 6. Foreign policy and the Korean invasions, 1592–1598. With Japan unified domestically, Hideyoshi turned his gaze outward in an ambitious, aggressive foreign policy that went beyond the archipelago. His rationale has been interpreted variously. Some see it as a quest for legitimacy on the international stage, others as an attempt to find a common external enemy to keep restless samurai occupied, and yet others see it as personal grand ambition to rival continental powers. His target was Ming China, but the immediate step was the invasion of Korea as a stepping stone. In 1592, he launched what is called the Imjin War, Japanese invasions of Korea, sending a massive force across the sea to the Korean peninsula. The initial landings were shockingly successful. Japanese armies rapidly moved through the peninsula, capturing Seoul and approaching Pyongyang. Their early success owed much to superior tactics, discipline, and the element of surprise. However, resistance stiffened, and several factors blunted the invasion's momentum. Naval opposition. Admiral Lee Sun-sin of Korea orchestrated a highly effective naval resistance using turtle ships and superior knowledge of the coastal waters, disrupting Japanese supply lines. His victories, particularly at places like Honsen Island, were decisive in slowing Japanese advances and preventing logistic overreach. Korean guerrilla resistance, local militias, Wibyang, and mobilized civilian fighters resisted occupation and harried Japanese forces, making consolidation difficult. Ming intervention. Ming China, predicting that a successful Japanese conquest of Korea would threaten Chinese security, sent substantial forces to assist the Koreans. The combined Ming-Korean armies eventually pushed the Japanese back toward the southern part of the peninsula. In 1596, after several years of continued but failing campaigns, a tenuous truce was brokered, but no clear diplomatic resolution was achieved. In 1597 Hideyoshi launched a second invasion, which was less successful and increasingly costly in both men and prestige. At the same time, Hideyoshi's grip on internal management began to show strain. Logistical difficulties, supply bottlenecks, and overextension weakened his ability to fully support the campaigns. Moreover, the war drained resources and exposed the limits of his administrative reach in projecting sustained power overseas. 7. Declining health, the question of succession, and death, 1597–1598. By the late 1590s, Hideyoshi's health deteriorated. He was in his early 60s, an age at that time approaching the limits of average life expectancy. The question of succession became urgent and fraught. His only legitimate son, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, was still a child, born in 1593. And the stability of the regime after Hideyoshi's death was uncertain. To manage this, Hideyoshi established a council of 5 elders, Taro, a regency council composed of the most powerful daimyo, including Tokugawa Ieyasu, Maeda Tashi, Yukita Hidei, Yasuji Kajikatsu, and Mori Teramoto, tasked with guiding and protecting Hideyoshi until he came of age. He also named 5 metropolitan guardians to support the council. The arrangement was meant to diffuse power enough to prevent a single lord from seizing control while maintaining the Toyotomi line. However, underlying rivalries, especially between Tokugawa Ieyasu and other council members, were not fully resolved. The power balance was delicate, and with Hideyoshi's death on September 18, 1598, the system he so carefully constructed began to fray almost immediately. His death triggered a scramble among the major powers, with Ieyasu increasingly asserting influence and, over the next few years, maneuvering to eclipse the Toyotomi heirs. Hideyoshi was buried with appropriate honors in Osaka, and Hideyoshi was installed in Osaka Castle as the titular head of the Toyotomi legacy, but without Hideyoshi's forceful personality the centralized control weakened. The subsequent years, especially culminating in the siege of Osaka, 1614–1615, would see the destruction of the Toyotomi line and Tokugawa consolidation. 8. Legacy. Toyotomi Hideyoshi's legacy is complex and multi-layered. He stands as one of the three unifiers of Japan, alongside Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu, the central architect who, through extraordinary personal ascent, completed the political unification of Japan after a protracted era of warring states. His rise from humble beginnings to the pinnacle of power was unprecedented, breaking traditional barriers of lineage and demonstrating a meritocratic streak, even if later years reinforced strict social hierarchies. His administrative reforms, land surveys, class separation, and centralized oversight of regional daimyo, laid crucial structural foundations that the Tokugawa regime would inherit and adapt. Indeed, many of the institutional contours of what became the Tokugawa shogunate, established after the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 and the fall of the Toyotomi at Osaka in 1615, were built upon the framework Hideyoshi created, even if the ultimate political beneficiaries were his rivals. Culturally, his patronage helped elevate the aesthetics of the tea ceremony, castle architecture, and courtly ceremony, blending warrior and aristocratic mores. Osaka Castle remains a symbol of his ambitions, massive, ostentatious, and built to impress both allies and potential foes. His foreign ventures, particularly the Korean invasions, are often judged more critically. While demonstrating imperial ambition, they overreached, drained resources, and failed to secure lasting gains. Though they did lead indirectly to changes in East Asian diplomacy and military awareness. The invasions left trauma in Korea and contributed to shifting regional dynamics. The campaigns are remembered very differently in Korea, China, and Japan, coloring Hideyoshi's image in neighboring historiographies. Finally, the collapse of his line after his death, despite his elaborate succession machinery, illustrates the limits of personality-driven order without durable institutionalization beyond his lifetime. Tokugawa Ieyasu's eventual rise can be seen partly as an exploitation of the structural residues Hideyoshi left and partly as stemming from pre-existing rival ambitions. Historiographically, scholars debate the nature of Hideyoshi, whether he is best seen as a ruthless opportunist, a visionary state builder, a brilliant military strategist, or an amalgam of all. In Japanese memory he occupies a near-mythical space as the self-made unifier, while rigorous modern studies attempt to parse his methods, motivations, and contradictions. 9. Summary of key themes. Extraordinary social mobility. From low-born origins to regent, his life is a rare example of transcending rigid social hierarchies of Sengoku Japan, though he re-entrenched those hierarchies once in power. Military genius coupled with political shrewdness, sieges, rapid response after Nobunaga's death, and the manipulation of rival daimyo were matched by institutional reforms that stabilized rule. Symbolic legitimation, strategic use of imperial titles, cultural patronage, and monumental architecture to give his rule both de facto and de jure weight. Centralization and social ordering, the land surveys, sword hunt, and class separation remade Japanese society in service of a unified state, paving the way for the relative peace of the Tokugawa era. Overreach abroad. Ambitious foreign expeditions into Korea, ultimately failing and costing human resources, contrasted with his domestic mastery. Fragile succession. Despite elaborate arrangements, the Toyotomi regime could not withstand the power vacuum after his death, leading to its eclipse and the rise of Tokugawa hegemony. 10. Aftermath and historical influence. The political vacuum after Hideyoshi's death and the subsequent skillful maneuvering by Tokugawa Ieyasu led to the decisive Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, wherein Ieyasu defeated rival factions and set up the Tokugawa shogunate. The destruction of the Toyotomi remnants at the Siege of Osaka, 1614–1615, closed the chapter on Hideyoshi's direct lineage but left Japan unified under a new, longer-lasting central regime. Tokugawa rule retained and regularized many of Hideyoshi's systems, Senkin Kotai evolving the control over daimyo, cadastral concerns, etc., while forcibly minimizing the possibility of another Hideyoshi-style power break. In cultural memory, Hideyoshi is both celebrated and critiqued. He is a staple character in Japanese theater, literature, and later nationalist narratives, sometimes lionized as the self-made unifier, sometimes portrayed with the hubris of overreaching. Internationally, particularly in Korea and China, his invasions are remembered as aggressive, traumatic episodes, affecting regional memory and periodic reflections in later diplomatic cultural exchanges. 11. Conclusion. Toyotomi Hideyoshi is one of the most striking figures in pre-modern world history, not merely because of the breadth of his accomplishments, but because of the paradoxes he embodied, a man who rose outside the established elite to create a new order, who simultaneously centralized power while imposing rigid order, who united Japan and yet overreached beyond it, and who attempted to build a durable dynasty that unraveled swiftly after his death. His life story is a study in ambition, innovation, and the precariousness of personality-centered regimes. The foundation he laid shaped the trajectory of Japan for centuries, even as the regime he created did not survive him.